Shalin, it's good to see you.
Pleasure to see you, Abid.
Yeah. We've been in a few of the same circles over the past year. Our history goes way back, though. I mean, you're born and raised in Jersey, so you're practically a brother.
Absolutely. Same place, same town, so
yeah,
I think that qualifies.
I think so. We might have some lineage that kind of matches up.
I'm sure we can trace it back.
All right. How did you get into the pharmaceutical industry? Like, what's the backstory here? I've always been curious, especially with testosterone, because that's not something that most people use as an avenue to get into pharmaceuticals, as well as testosterone as an oral form. So tell me about this.
I approached it from this unloved perspective, to be honest, right? So I was actually doing my own health journey and lo and behold figured out I had low testosterone.
Okay.
Right? I was only about 30 at the time, so it was low to normal. That's a better way to characterize it. But again, it kind of had me looking into this a lot deeper and understanding what is the role of testosterone. It was interesting at the time was also when there were a couple of those faulty studies around cardiovascular risk.
Yes.
And a lot of noise, the FDA changed the labels, and the whole space effectively collapsed.
That's right.
At the same time, I come from the investment world, there was a drug that was being developed. It was an oral testosterone. It was Kyzatrex.
That's right.
And it came across my desk, sort of serendipitously. So started looking into this. Again, understood testosterone as a molecule is so important.
Yeah.
What could we potentially do here? Again, have this history of sort of taking the challenges that other people don't want to and finding a way to make them work. And that's when the journey really started.
That's fantastic. And so how long ago was that? And then what was like the most difficult inception steps to get this thing going?
So that was about 10 years ago. So it's, we're pretty deep into the journey. I mean, Kyzatrex was approved 3 years ago, so that part of the journey is newer. But, it's always a roller coaster, to be honest. It's not a rocket straight up, and it's not just, sort of a gravy train. But the clinical development side, there always are challenges that come with that. You're dealing with 30 sites across the country.
Yeah.
You're dealing with recruiting patients. You're dealing with protocols that the people need to stick to, and there's a lot of variability, right? So you have to keep those things on track because for the FDA, there is no, hey, this was out of bounds and that's okay, right? Everything has to stay on track. So we ran into some things too where if things weren't done right, we would have to go in, try and correct them, or scientifically make the case on the why. Coming from a non-traditional background, we didn't have too much let's call it reverence for the FDA in that sense, and we quite logical in our approach. So we said, look, these are the reasons, this is why, and let's move forward. So we kind of took some gambles there as it relates to that, and we got it across the line. The amazing part of drug development is getting to sort of across that line puts you at the starting line.
That's right.
That's when the journey actually starts, because now we have this great product that generated the best data, safety, and efficacy of the space.
Certainly.
But now you got to go tell the whole world.
So that brings me to my next question. Are you finding that much of what you're doing now is about education? And who is it that you're educating? Is it patients or is it practitioners?
It's both.
Yeah.
It's an education. I'm glad you used that word. That is literally the core of what we do. I think education every day in different formats, whether it's one-on-one peers, we're talking to mass audiences, we're going on social media, right? We're using all the tools at our disposal now because we know, again, how much of a lift this type of activity is. But it's really both. It's providers and patients together that we want to not just let them know about Kyzatrex, but also we talking about testosterone therapy, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's a new found momentum that's happening behind it, which is amazing, right? Again, been doing this for 10 years at this point, and we've never had such a strong momentum from a regulatory perspective.
That's right.
And that's a nice win to have, but it doesn't mean you kind of get to let up on the gas.
No. And the regulatory changes take a long time to finally see come to fruition. I mean, you started working on these a long time ago, and it crosses over administrations.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's tough to kind of get that consistency administration to administration. So when you have something like this, right now we're on full go mode because we have the opportunity, and rightfully so, right? Everybody can debate politics, but at the end of the day, we're after better patient care and outcomes. So
that's right.
I mean, I can actually flip that back to you, right? And say, okay, how's testosterone affected your practice and your patients?
It is one of my foundational tools, and it's a dialogue I have with every single one of my patients, men and women. testosterone is one of the things that's vital for vascular health. Testosterone itself, and as well the metabolites, estradiol. So when it's been practiced in the past by inexperienced practitioners, doing things that maybe optimizes one aspect of testosterone but not optimizing its full potential, then this is where we get confusion and we get maybe bad outcomes or outcomes that are misunderstood. And this is how those old studies got so much press, because people were probably practicing testosterone in an antiquated way without knowing, that we need to optimize these hormones because they optimize vascular health. They optimize our resilience. They optimize our ability to manage glucose. And, it optimizes muscular health. Muscular health is vital. I mean, our muscles are our biggest endocrine organ.
Right.
And so, the thinking that testosterone is just for, performance or for sexual health, yeah, it really helps those, and for good reason. But it also, helping performance, helping muscular health, helps overall physiology.
Right.
So, this is the dialogue I have with every patient, women and men, and it's a dialogue that I have with practitioners.
How do those conversations go now with your cardiologist colleagues? Have
Yeah.
they changed, or you still feel like there's a lot of work to do?
When I first started talking to them about using testosterone therapeutically, and even in post-MI patients or anybody that had a hint of atherosclerotic disease, they looked at me like I had two heads, and they just didn't understand, because they were going off of what was hearsay, what these studies that we've talked about, and that was their foundation. And then they were just looking at meta-analysis or summaries that really didn't tease into the data. So there was a lot of resistance in the beginning. Every year I find more and more cardiologists are starting to understand not only that hormones are vital, but our interpretation of say LDLs and cholesterol has to change. So it's getting more accepted in these circles and people that come to us. But if I go to some of the more conventional, larger scale conferences, I'd probably still get looked at like I was crazy.
Right.
Because they like who hears of a cardiologist that tells their patient, "I'm going to put you on testosterone."
Right.
Meanwhile, anybody that's got a total testosterone lower than say like 250, I mean, their chances of having a heart attack are double. I mean, and how is that statistic being missed?
Yeah, why are they ignoring it? It's a really good question. I think going back to that education, we want everybody to come along and really understand the data so that they can apply it ultimately for patients' benefit, right? So I think the good thing is we're in an accelerating information environment, so the changes should happen a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. So what's Marius doing as far as data accumulation and maybe studies? Is that something that's on the mindset for Marius?
It is. So we're doing it in a couple different ways.
Mm-hmm.
We have some larger partners that are clinics that ultimately have thousands of patients, right? So what are the data sets that we can run through there to show some of the outcomes, some of the improvement in biomarkers? That's certainly of interest and a relatively easy lift. On the other hand, we're also looking at things like, as you talk about, muscle and its endocrine role and how important it is, like GLP-1s and Kyzatrex, for example. This is a study we're prepping with actually a very large institution right now.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we get off the ground in Q2, but I think that can really demonstrate the value to people a lot faster. Again, we know the value, people like us and people at longevity conferences, but I think if you're able to tie it to something like a GLP-1 where we know the muscle loss is a real issue, we have real concerns around sarcopenia and the downstream impacts or fracture risk and hip fractures and mortality and so forth, right? If we can tie it to something as powerful as that, I think you'll get adoption at a new, maybe warp speed.
The previous interview I had was with Dr. Min. You've been mentioning maybe some studies to look at imaging data too?
Yep, that's also somewhere, again, because as you mentioned, as you know, from the cardiology side, how important this could be. Again, the narrative had always been, this is bad, switch to neutral. Now we have the opportunity to show, is this beneficial? Right? And I think that, again, neutral is fine, beneficial is a game changer.
Definitely.
Right? So, no, we're definitely looking at imaging studies, looking at the biomarkers, seeing the improvements so we can track them. And these are not short, right? We don't expect changes in 3 months, right?
Yeah.
Looking at 12, 18, 24 months time frame, I think that will be very compelling for, honestly, cardiology and medical across the board.
One of the initiatives that Kyzatrex has, or Marius has, is the Testosterone Project. That's one of the things I'm most excited about that you're undertaking, and I really commend you for doing that. Could you fill us in on like where the progress is, and maybe a little background detail on that?
Absolutely. So yeah, Testosterone Project is an advocacy group combined of patients and clinicians across the board, and it has 3 main objectives, and these will continue to evolve as we continue to achieve them, right?
Yeah.
So the first one is testing, right? Basic testing, both male or female. You can talk about age, maybe over 40 is a good mark, maybe it's 30 years old, but everybody should know their testosterone level.
Yeah.
And it should not be a challenge to get this done. You should not have to go into your primary care doctor and argue about why you need a testosterone level, right?
And not just your total and
Total
free.
and free, total and free. Because if you think about it from a male perspective at least, testosterone is the single best biomarker of your overall health, right? Your understanding your cardiovascular health, your neuro health, inflammation across your body, glucose metabolism, and so on. So why wouldn't we measure the single most important thing that can give you this picture and tell you where you need to go, right? Where do you need to dive deeper? So testing, very simple one. The second is descheduling testosterone. Testosterone today is a controlled substance.
That's right.
And not only does that add to stigma around it and the perception that I don't want to use it because this is steroids or bodybuilding, but then there's a real access problem, right?
Yeah.
Physicians need to register. Physicians need to submit prescriptions to state boards. Patients go through barriers at pharmacies.
Yeah.
We've worked with pharmacies that don't want to carry Kyzatrex because it's a controlled substance and it's extra work logistically and extra scrutiny on them, right? So every step of the chain becomes complicated, and ultimately what happens, patients give up.
Yeah.
They don't want it, they don't get on therapy that they need because of this restriction. And honestly, if you look back at the data for why it was scheduled, because it wanted to reduce, younger, bodybuilding abuse, none of that worked. And that is not what the case is. So it's
That's
doing
right.
more harm than good, keeping 25 million men potentially off of therapy because of the barriers versus, a very small problem that will happen anyway, right? So that's the second bit. And the third one, which I think is also tremendous, is an FDA-approved female testosterone.
Yeah.
This is huge,
Yeah.
right? Testosterone is a female hormone too. It's not just a male hormone,
Yes,
just like
yes.
estrogen is a male hormone as well,
Yeah.
right? So the female group has been extremely vocal, proactive about their care hormones. They did great work with getting the black box off estrogen products and other HRT products, and they understand how important testosterone is in the female physiology as well, right? So, but why does the path have to be so difficult if we have the data, have the understanding, know there are mechanisms in place here? This should not be a 5-year, 10,000 patient outcome study.
Yeah.
You're replacing what is physiologic, right? So, and again, you can tell more about how you see this in patients every day. Why is it being denied?
It makes no sense to us, and that's part of the therapeutic panel that we deliver to all our women. Estradiol, progesterone, and testosterone. Those 3 need to be replaced. Maybe not at the same time, depending on their sensitivity, what their tolerance is for change, their hormonal sensitivity, but it needs to be addressed because testosterone is important for muscle development in women and sarcopenia, bone loss. We haven't even talked about bone health,
right?
And osteoporosis, osteoarthritis. I mean, this is potentially foundational preventative care.
Yeah, it's a big, big problem. So I think that's, again, as you're mentioning, there's so many areas that it affects.
Yeah.
From our perspective, female indication should be similar to the male. You're replacing a hormone that's deficient.
Yeah.
It's not about, I think the only pathway that seemingly the medical community does agree on so far is HSDD. But to us, that's a severe limitation of what the molecule is intended to do. And it should not be, think about the logistical problems. A lot of insurance and payers won't cover sexual health.
That's right.
So,
Crazy.
You go through all of this, female needs it, and then they're going to get denied by their insurance.
We replace thyroid. That's an essential hormone.
Right.
We don't do it for sex hormones because there's a stigma and because it's it's a controlled substance.
Yeah,
You know,
thyroid's not controlled though.
No.
Right? Why? Right? Yeah, there's so many analogs you can give. I mean, again, for testosterone, you can claim it's performance enhancing. If I give you a GLP-1 and you're an athlete and you shave a couple seconds off
Yeah.
your times, is that performance enhancing?
But let's take it even a step further back. Like, what's wrong with a performance-enhancing medication?
Right.
Shouldn't we all want to perform at our peak, at our best? Don't we deserve that for our lives and for those in our lives? So I think that the stigma of using a performance-enhancing medication is also something that we need to like really reassess.
Change the definition.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to be optimal, right? I
Yeah.
think that's a very fair word and a fair desire of every human being.
Yeah. So is the Testosterone Project is something that's going to take some time. It's something you're probably actively working on.
It is. So yeah, it's a long haul, right? Because
Yeah.
again, going back to that education, right? That's where it really starts. And these are the objectives. I think some may be achieved sooner versus others. It's
Yeah.
just going to be on different timescales. But as we talked about, there's so many different aspects of why testosterone is important.
Yeah.
So we can look at different patient populations. Let's look at, we've spent a lot of time getting into the VA. Let's
Yeah.
think about VA members and what kind of issues they may have around testosterone deficiency or higher prevalence rates or the depression that's tied to
Yeah.
PTSD and so forth, right? So like there's so many interesting subgroups here
Definitely.
that I think we have to speak to in their language, right? So we want to spend that time, talk to these different groups. Think about type 2 diabetes, right? Like there was a great paper that was done, T4DM, and showed the remission of type 2 diabetes or the non-progression of prediabetes to diabetes on testosterone therapy,
Yeah.
right? You got an amazing tool in this toolbox. So how do we talk to the diabetic community and say, hey, look, let's
Yeah.
think about this. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
It's
They should
combined
use, Yeah,
therapy.
they should use in parallel. Well, before we finish up, we mentioned women's health a bunch of times. What is Marius doing for women's health and potentially releasing maybe a lower dose of Kyzatrex for women?
Again, we're doing the clinical work that's required. We're engaging actively with the FDA on this. They have an acute interest. FDA and HHS have talked about female testosterone being part of the equation. So we are doing, simultaneously we're doing both
Yeah.
ends, regulatory and clinical to kind of get us across that line. Of course, this is definitely going to be a lower dose. Females
Yeah.
usually have about 1/10 the dose of a
Certainly.
male. We know we can take Kyzatrex down to those levels. Frankly, we're going to run like hell to get there.
Yeah,
That's the plan.
yeah. Well, very good. It's great to talk to you, Shalin.
Pleasure.
Yeah, when are you going to be back in Jersey?
I
mean,
think it's around summertime. I don't know. You have a family trip before then?
Yeah, I probably do. We might connect. All right, Shalin, it's good seeing you.
Good seeing you, Abid.